Hopefully everybody had a Merry Christmas, good first night of Hanukkah, except the Detroit Red Wings. A whole lot to talk about on today's Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That is my good friend and my co-host, Hunter Hodies, one of the co-hosts of Locked On Penguins. We want to thank everyone who's making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is presented by FanDuel, where you can enjoy the NFL season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $250 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, coaching change in Detroit, interesting surges in Ottawa and Pittsburgh, and then the Rangers are still probably bottoming out. So, a whole lot to get to. First of all, happy holidays, Hunter. Let's get on into the situation up in Detroit. You and I have both been very skeptical of the Steve Yzerman long-term plan for a few seasons now, and to bring the heat off of himself, Steve Yzerman fired his coach and promoted somebody, Todd McLellan, everyone's very familiar with. Number of stops, a bunch of different places, LA, San Jose, Edmonton. Initial thoughts, reactions?
I feel like I kind of saw this coming because, you're 13-17-4 to start the season. This was a pretty big year for the Red Wings. They came really close, and I mean really close, to making the playoffs last year. They didn't get in, but you had people thinking, okay, they got that close. Maybe this is the year they get over the hump, because if you don't, there's going to be consequences. And so far, again, like a lot of players just haven't played up to their billing, and Lalonde just was not performing that well as a head coach. Normally when a coaching change happens, it's one of two things is going on, or both things. The two main things I look at, Nick, are how are your stars playing under that coach? And B, what type of goaltending are you getting? I feel like a lot of times when coaches get fired, it's one of those two reasons. The stars aren't producing, or you're not getting that good of goaltending, at least for me. For Detroit this year, you have Ville Husso's been up and down. He hasn't played very well. Alex Lyon hasn't really been that good. They've gone okay goaltending from Cam Talbot. He's actually at .912 this year, which is a lot better than their other two goalies. So he's at least okay. But you look up and down this lineup. Lucas Raymond's at a point per game. That's good. But Dylan Larkin, he's a bit below a point per game this year. DeBrincat is a bit below a point per game. But the rest of that lineup is not producing the way that I feel like Steve Yzerman maybe thought it was going to this season. And I think that also plays into why they made this coaching change. But the fact of the matter is, and I hope this is not a hot take to you or other people listening, I personally just don't think Steve Yzerman has done that good of a job as Red Wings general manager. You look at this roster right now, forward-wise, I like the top six, but you go to that defensive group. I love Mo Seider. I think he's a really good number one defenseman. But you got Justin Holl playing top pairing minutes. You got Jeff Petrie in your second pair, which he's fine, but Eric Gustafsson is there. And it's not a defensive group that I feel like can really make a big push for the playoffs. So I feel like if this continues to go south, and we'll see, because McLellan has been a good coach in all of his stops. But if this continues to go south, I would not be surprised if the Red Wings ownership group moves on from Steve Yzerman. I know that might be a hot take to Red Wings fans that are tuning into our show for today. But again, man, I hope this isn't a hot take. I just don't think he's done that good of a job.
So there's a few more angles to attack at this. Number one, if you look at the drafting, it's not great. Seider is definitely a good defenseman.
Awesome.
Lucas Raymond is definitely good. But if you go through, Yzerman takes over in 2019. Seider is the only player in that class that plays more than 22 games. Elmer Soderblom has 21. Albert Johansson, who's on the team right now, has 17. The year after that, Lucas Raymond is the only player that plays more than 2 NHL games. The year after that, Simon Evanson has 55. There's one other person in that class with 1 game. The year after that, they have one player who's playing this year who's got 30 games under his belt in Marco Kasper. 23 and 24, no players have made the NHL. The Red Wings are not graduating guys. And look, you can say, well, they like to marinate guys in the AHL. This is how they've always operated. They slow play it. They slow develop it. That's great in theory. But if you go back to what we're talking about before that, before Yzerman takes over, none of the guys that Ken Holland left in the AHL did a whole heck of a lot when they got to the NHL. And like, I personally feel that is an outdated and frankly inefficient way to think about developing your talent. You know, when you think about it from the perspective of, well, yeah, when Ken Holland was running things and the contracts were a lot cheaper and they had a lot more flexibility because they had defined great players. You know, you had Zetterberg, you had Datsuk, you had a foundation of great players that, okay, we need a third line left wing. Let's bring this guy up from the AHL. Whereas since that group dissipated, you know, since Zetterberg, Datsuk, Kronwall all retired, they have yet to really get another full wave of guys. Sure, Larkin's a good player. Larkin is a really good player. I don't think he's a 1C on a cup team. I don't think that's a crazy take. You know, they've taken some swings, whether it be DeBrincat, Patrick Kane. Like, they have tried to do the best.
They've been really aggressive in free agency. They've been really aggressive on the trade market, and that's fine. It's just that some of these moves haven't maybe panned out the way they thought they were going to. You can't spend all of that money in free agency during a couple of those years, Nick, and be where you are today. It's not good enough.
No, it's definitely not. Because, like, you look at that Andrew Kopp contract, you look at the JT Compher contract, you look at the Ben Sherratt trade, you look at the Jeff Petrie trade. Like, yeah, some of these are fine. Like, you're only paying Petrie $2.3 million. That's not bad. But you've spent a lot of money. You have burned draft picks, and the best you have to show for it is barely missing the playoffs. And look, 5 years, I feel like, is a reasonable window because that's 6 off seasons as a general manager. I feel like that's a reasonable amount of time to say, are we going in the right direction or are we stuck? And Detroit, very much like Ottawa, who we're going to talk about in the second segment, like Buffalo, who we've talked about a lot on the show when you and I have been here, you get stuck for a number of reasons. You know, it's not just the general manager, it's not just the coach, it's not just the players. It's a combination of a bunch of mistakes over an extended period of time that keep you out of the playoffs for this long. You know, the Red Wings, they never really took their medicine the way they should have after that group that won the Stanley Cup in 2008 did. You know, there probably should have been a 2 or 3 year window where they stunk up the joint and they picked relatively high. And look, the best they have to show for it, Lucas Raymond and Mo Seider. Mo Seider, I think, is a first pair defenseman on a Stanley Cup winner. I think Lucas Raymond is probably a top 6 forward, but they just don't have the guys. And like, if you want to give Yzerman the benefit of the doubt and say, well, let's see how the draft classes pan out, when you look historically at the way the Red Wings have drafted under him and under Ken Holland, it takes these guys a while. And you might want to say, well, give him some time. At a certain point, you got to show me something. Like, other than Seider and Raymond, not a lot of these guys have given you a whole lot. So why should you give him even more time?
And I get your take about Dylan Larkin not being a 1C on a contending team, but he is at least still a 2C.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a 2C.
And honestly, you could make an argument that he could be on the top line for a team. I would probably push back a little bit, but you can definitely have him up there, with the way that he has played throughout his career. So you have those pieces. That's really good. You have Seider, obviously, but you're right. Like, they need more in that lineup, and they just haven't been getting it. I mean, I understand why they did what they did, getting Patrick Kane, but at this point, man, he's just a bit older right now. You know, he's not the player that he used to be, even as recently as 3 to 4, 5 years ago, something like that. So they just need, I feel like, in my opinion, maybe a few more younger pieces in this lineup, a few more younger, really good pieces in this lineup. You know, you have the Comfort contract, you have the Kopp contract. I like the swing for DeBrincat because he is a really good sniper. But again, I look up and down this lineup. They still need, in my opinion, another pure sniper or two if they really want to get this thing going in the right direction. I will say, with Todd McClellan, he's been a very good defensive coach, especially for a long time. He's worked out in a lot of those stops that he's had. You know, you mentioned Edmonton, Los Angeles, San Jose. I think he'll get them to play better defensively, but will they be able to score a bit more? That's where I'm going to be wondering for the rest of this season.
Yeah, no, they feel like they're a guy short, at least one, if not two guys for them to be a serious playoff team. We're going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, Hunter's going to glaze Sidney Crosby for 10 minutes. We'll be right back. If you guys know me, either here on Locked On NHL or on Locked On Oilers, you know I love going to things, whether it's WWE, concerts, sports, comedy, whatever. Tonight, I'm going to WWE. Got my tickets for the show through the Gametime app, the only app I use to buy tickets to get out there to go to events. Some of the best features in the ticket buying experience, things like all-in pricing, where you toggle the feature on, it shows you the total up front, and there are no surprise fees at checkout. The seat view, where you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. And Gametime ticket coverage, where your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Hunter and I here on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. And Hunter texted me, what do you want to talk about today? And he said, can we talk about the Penguins, please? And I said, sure, Hunter, we can talk about the Penguins. So I will start with this. I feel like the NHL is like, this might be the worst season in a while in terms of teams and the distribution of talent amongst the teams, because the Islanders and the Rangers both look a lot worse than they were last year. And this is not a knock on the Penguins, but they're just being opportunistic. You know, the standings have worked in their favor. They've run into a nice run of form where they've played really well for an extended period of time, and they're taking advantage of the board. You know, you can't say, well, they're not that good. Well, they're going to be pretty good. They're going to be in the mix most of the season, even if the field isn't great. And I don't think it is, but you can't begrudge them for taking advantage of the situation they're in.
Yeah, the biggest thing is for the Eastern Conference this year, it is so top heavy, man. I mean, you have the main big teams right now, right? You have Florida up there, you have Toronto, you have Carolina, New Jersey, and Washington. And then probably, I think Boston at this point, they are starting to really turn this around under Sacco. They're playing some really good hockey under him. Tampa Bay, that super line is really cooking. I would say right now, at least 6 of the playoff spots are probably locked in. You can make an argument for 7 with Tampa Bay, but that last playoff spot, man, it is wide open. And you're seeing the Penguins really try and climb into this. They were 7-12-4 at one point this season. They were getting blown out on a nightly basis. The fans weren't coming to the games. They were getting booed off the ice. It was bad. You know, they looked really lifeless in a lot of these games. There was no pushback, no energy, nothing. Heck, you easily could have made a case for firing Mike Sullivan after some of those really lopsided losses. And heck, I was on the show basically saying, like, yeah, if they were to fire him right now, I would not be surprised considering how ugly this was. But credit to the team for really finding their form in the month of December. Honestly, this really started at the end of November, Nick. They're 9-3-1 in their last 13 games. And none of these wins are flukes, except maybe the Panthers game. They got really badly outshot. The only reason why they won that game was because Spencer Knight was not very good. But outside of that game, the Penguins have been really beating up on some good teams. You know, they've beaten the Maple Leafs, they beat the Canucks, they've beaten the Bruins, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and again, these aren't just flukes. They are outplaying them. The numbers support that. The eye test supports that. And a major reason also for this turnaround has been the play of Sidney Crosby. Started the season a bit slow, was really going through the motions a little bit with not scoring as many goals. And that's still the case even a little bit right now, though. I think that's going to be turning at some point here over the next week or two. But he's well over a point per game now, 39 points in 36 games. He's had 2 4-point performances in his last 3 games. He's been absolutely kicking butt over the last week. Brian Rust, he's been awesome. Ricard Raquel, he already has 16 goals this year, which is 1 more than his total from last year. He only had 15 goals last year. And another big reason, Erik Karlsson has been playing like Erik Karlsson for the last month. He was really bad to start this season. He was out to lunch defensively. He was not even driving offense. But ever since then, Nick, every time that he has been on the ice, he is driving offense, and you're seeing him cut back from the mistakes that he's had in his own zone. He's played 253 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time for the Penguins their last 13 games. During that time, when he's on the ice, the Penguins have 53% of the shot attempts, 18 goals for, 9 goals against, 56% of the high danger chances, and 54% of the scoring chances. He is playing lights out right now, and it's not a coincidence when he's playing like this, the team is playing better. So at the very least, just because I don't need to ramble on for 30 more minutes about the Penguins on a national show, at the very least, they're making this interesting and they have climbed back into this.
So let me ask you this then. What do you think is the biggest barrier to them maintaining this level of play? Obviously, they're on a bit of a heater, 9-3-1 in the last 13. That you're not going to sustain that. But what do you think is the biggest component to them staying above the waterline, if you will, of staying in the mix as opposed to what the last 2 years have been?
Like the biggest barrier, I mean, it's easy for me, goaltending. Like they have to get at least average goaltending if they want to keep playing like this. Tristan Jarry, really ugly to start the year, had to go down to Wilkes-Barre, found his form a little bit again since coming back, but he's still not at the level that I want him to be at for this team. He's been better, but again, Nick, the bar was literally on the floor. He's still below water and goals saved above expected for this year. Same thing with Alex Nedeljkovic. He hasn't played that well this year, and you can easily make an argument right now that their best goaltender is down in Wilkes-Barre and Yoel Blomqvist. He was playing really well when he was up with the Penguins during Jarry's stint in Wilkes-Barre. So again, the biggest barrier for me, it's still the goaltending. They have to get at least average goaltending to a little bit above average goaltending if they want to keep playing like this. If their goalies really go south once we get into the new year, I mean, it won't be surprising to see the results kind of start turning. But for right now, they've climbed back into it. I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, we're back to Department. I'd like to file a claim, but they are at least making it interesting and they are in the race.
I mean, they're 9-3-1 in the last 13. They've got 40 goals against, so that works out to about 3.0 something goals per game. That's workable if your offense is functional and your special teams are passing.
They're top 5 in goals, expected goals this year. Excuse me.
They've been consistently good 5-on-5 the last few years. It's been the special teams that have really let them down the last handful of seasons. And then real quick, we'll throw Ottawa in here as well as a team that's played pretty well over the last handful of weeks. They're in that second wildcard spot. They're 8-2-0 in their last 10 games. They're at a .559 points percentage. They're in the mix firmly. 98 goals against through 34 games for Ottawa. That's pretty good. They are never, and it's weird because on paper, Ottawa's defense should be decent. Chabot and Jake Sanderson are both really good. Chabot's having a really strong season. Somebody I felt has been really underrated in his career because of the environment around him. But they're in the mix. They're another team that's, taking advantage of the environment around them. You're not going to say they're world beaters. You're not going to say they're a cup contender, but they have every bit of chance to be a playoff team as the handful of teams below them. If any of Ottawa, Pittsburgh, the Rangers, the Islanders, even the Flyers end up in that last playoff spot, it wouldn't be that much of a surprise based on how this season is unfolding so far. But right now, Ottawa deserves some credit for where they're at. They looked really rough after that first month. It looked like it was taking Ullmark a little while to settle in. That's come together for them. Like I said, Chabot's playing very well. And it's just good to see a team taking advantage of this situation, unlike last year, where the Islanders just kept losing games in overtime and they ended up in that last playoff spot for most of the season.
Hey, they still have a lot of loser points already this year, Nick, and we're not even at game 41. So we'll see if they can climb back into it, getting even more loser points here as we turn the clock to 2025. But they've been really bad this year. I mean, you saw 7-1 drubbing against the Sabres, man. I mean, goodness gracious. The Islanders fans are booing them off the ice on the island. But getting back to Ottawa, my biggest thing, man, their big guns have been awesome this year. Tim Stützle, 11 goals, 39 points in 34 games. Batherson's at a point per game. Tkachuk is at a point per game. Even Claude Giroux is also playing really well this year. Josh Norris is also playing great. But you mentioned it. Linus Ullmark had a bit of a rough start to the season, wasn't really used to his new environment yet. He has been on fire as of late. He got a little bit nicked up before the break. Hopefully everything is okay with him just because he has been playing at an insanely high level. Ever since that few week stretch though, Nick, 12-7-2 overall, 9.15 save percentage. When was the last time the Ottawa Senators had a goalie with a 9.15 save percentage? Almost 9.20, man. It's been almost, it feels like a decade.
It's probably since like 2012 Craig Anderson, if I had to guess. It's probably been almost a decade. It's crazy to see, but it's good to see. It's good to see.
He's awesome. He's been playing really well. I mean, the Penguins played the Senators about a week and a half ago, and Ullmark was standing on his head. Even on the second half of a back-to-back, he wasn't even supposed to start that game, Nick. He still played like someone who was on 5 days rest. He was out there making every single save, looking like his Boston days. He is, again, by far one of the best goaltenders in the league. And if he keeps this up, he gets back healthy, he keeps this up, they may very well get that final playoff spot. It would not be surprising, considering that they finally have their answer in net and their big guns are really producing this year.
We're going to take our second and final break of today's show, and when we come back, we'll talk about the miserable state of hockey in the great state of New York. Coming up right after this. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers finish the season strong, $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. You could do player props like touchdowns, receptions, yards, how many points each team will score tonight in the NFL. Seahawks, Bears, where the Bears are 4.5-point home underdogs. Triple header of football on Saturday. Chargers at the Patriots. Chargers 4.5-point road favorites. The Broncos are 3-point road underdogs going to Cincinnati to play Joe Burrow and the Bengals. And then in the nightcap, NFC West showdown, Cardinals and Rams, where the Rams are 6.5-point favorites. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Hunter and I on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. And hockey in the state of New York's in rough shape, brother. Between the Sabres, the Rangers, and the Islanders, this is miserable. You know, the Rangers got mud stomped on Friday by the Devils. That wasn't just like we didn't have our game. That was getting dragged around the rink for 60 minutes by a team that genuinely hates you. And, you know,
you're just trying to go around fighting people that whole game. I'm like, are we not going to try to score a goal here, or what's the plan, guys?
No, the Rangers are sore losers. They've always been like this with this group, where when things are going great, they're great front runners. You know, if they get out to an early lead, they can body bag you very easily. But whenever things get tough, whenever there's adversity, they resort to this because they know they can't make the hockey play. They know they can't do it. And that game on Monday, and it's something I do truly commend about the Devils. The Devils hate the Rangers. Like, Jack Hughes actively hates the Rangers. And he plays with an intensity and a mindfulness to his game that, okay, yeah, they're bigger than me. They're stronger than me. I don't care. I'm going to score 2 goals. I'm going to set up another 2 goals. We're going to win this game. And then I'm going to make fun of them when we win this game. And it just speaks to the Devils have gotten a lot of flack over the years for how slow they've been to really put it together. But make no mistake about it. That is probably the most replicable path of paths for teams looking to get out of the sewer. You need to wait a long time. You know, Ray Shero started that process 8-9 years ago, and they're finally starting to see the fruit bear now. And you think about that in terms of the Sabres and the Islanders, who have been very reticent. It's more the Islanders. The Sabres have tried, but it hasn't worked out for them for a few different reasons. The Islanders have been very reticent, and they are paying the consequences this year of not making that forward-thinking move. You know, you could have gotten a lot for Brock Nelson last year or the year before that, as opposed to now, where his numbers have taken a little bit of a dip and he has less team control, so there's less value there. You think about the Scott Mayfield extension, which was unnecessary and frankly an overpay. And it's kind of like looking at different tiers of denial. You know, you think about where the Devils are, where the Rangers are, where the Islanders are, and then where Buffalo is. It's different levels of denial.
Right. No, I agree. I think with the Islanders, I just really don't know what the plan is with Lou Lamoriello just running this show. He's bringing, Nick, the same team back virtually every year with little to no changes. I mean, I loved the Anthony Duclair signing this past summer. I actually felt like that was a really nice contract that Lamoriello gave out for a player that, you know, has shown a really good history of, you know, depth scoring. You know, on a third line role, he can play in your top 6. He can play all over your lineup. It was a really nice move. But other than that, he just really didn't do that much to improve the team. And he really hasn't been doing that much these last few years. They just kind of keep running back this same show with mostly the same players from when Barry Trotz was the head coach. And he hasn't been the head coach now for the last several seasons. It was Lane Lambert. Now it's Patrick Waugh. You've had 2 different head coaches since Barry Trotz left, and you're still mostly running back almost all of his players. So again, I just really don't know what the plan is up there. I feel like they either got to commit to really blowing this up, or you got to go and be a bit more aggressive, I think. I think them just kind of staying in this mushy middle doesn't make too much sense. But I also do know that some of their contracts are a bit hard to move right now because A, they have a lot of term, B, they have a lot of money, and C, there's just a lot of no trade clauses on those. So they're in a really difficult situation right now. They just got booed off the ice against the Sabres, of course, earlier this week. And I will say, I felt really happy for the Sabres, their fans and their players for that they were able to get that win, just because, once a losing streak like that sets in, takes a lot for it to go away, man. Like it's a stench. It really is. It takes a while for it to go away. I'm glad they got this win because they really, and I mean really needed it. But I still think they're going to probably make some more changes as the season goes on. Do they trade Dylan Cousins? Does somehow Paige Thompson get on the trade block at some point? I think that's a question we might have to start asking ourselves at some point. Again, could be unlikely, but I could still see Buffalo potentially put him out there just to maybe see what teams would look for trading him. And then as for the Rangers, yeah, man, I mean, it feels like something else is going to have to drop there. It feels like they've kind of reached the expiration date for, I don't know, I guess this core group in terms of their chances for a Stanley Cup. I feel like for them, they might have to go out and make a big time, and I mean a big time splash trade. The problem is right now, I mean, A, obviously the roster freeze at least right now, but B, who is going to be a dance partner for this? Are you going to trade Chris Kreider? I don't think you're going to find a taker for Zibanejad and a big deal when you consider his contract, the no trade and all that. So who else are you moving? Like that's the big thing. But I feel like this is well beyond a coaching problem. I think this is a situation where I think some guys have lost their confidence. I mean, Shesterkin can only do so much behind that blue line, behind the forwards. He's been doing everything he can. But if no one is going to defend in front of him, again, there's really only so much he can do. And just to shout out the Devils real quick, they are playing lights out right now. I know that they do play very fast, but they're playing great in their own zone, Nick. Have you been seeing the amount of shots that they're giving up these last 10 or so games? 12 shots, 2 games in a row, 15 shots, 17 shots, 20 shots. They're mostly keeping the opposition below, I would say, 20 to 22 shots a game. They are very stingy to play against. They're getting good production from their top guys. That is going to be a very, and I mean a very dangerous team in the playoffs.
The thing about the Devils that's really encouraging is the simple matter of the fact is that they recognized their issue.
Yeah.
And then they overcorrected. They replaced both of the goalie spots. Allen was last year at the deadline, and they brought in Markstrom. They turned over 3 of the 6 defenseman spots from last year. Mm-hmm. They brought in different types of guys, Paul Cotter, somebody a little bit more rugged. They brought
Nason's been awesome.
Nason's been very good for them. They've put together a really well-rounded group. And ultimately, for them, I think it'll simply be a matter of fact if they can get their style to translate to the postseason or not, because tempo transition teams typically, when they come up against a slower, more methodical team like Florida or Carolina, they typically have a harder time repeating that offense the way those teams play them defensively. You think about the way the Devils played in the second round against Carolina 2 years ago, where they were just entirely outplayed. And it happens, sometimes style is too much to overcome. But to wrap up on the Rangers, this is untenable. You can't have a whole season go on the way it's going right now. And there are still like 56 games left in this season. And whether or not Laviolette goes, the general manager goes, the players change, what is happening right now is just too toxic to sustain for that extended period of a time. It would be like if you had a knockout in a boxing match and then they let you mount the guy who was unconscious on the ground and keep pummeling them. That's kind of what it feels like is happening to the Rangers right now. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, hit the show with a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell. We will talk to you guys next week.